back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and we're here speaking with Brien Foerster and Christopher Dunn. Their webpage, Brian's is brienfoerster.com, and Chris's GizaPyramid.com. That's brienfoerster.com and GizaPyramid.com. So, guys, before we went to break, we were talking about Tiwanako, and Chris, you never really said what they say this structure was used for. So what's the mythology associated with it?
As far as Tiwanako, I don't know what the mythology says about it. I know exactly, well, not exactly, but I have ideas about what it was used for. The Tiwanako site, as Brien said, shows the evidence of some kind of a mud flow or cataclysm in prehistory, where you do have these very finely tooled blocks sitting on pillars of mud. It appears that there is a pyramid at Tiwanako, and also what is considered to be an underground temple. But there's some very unique blocks of stone at Tiwanako, but more so at Puma Punka, which, if you consider that to be a part of the the same kind of construction or the same facility, then my interest was really piqued when I went to Puma Punka.
Yeah, and I got questions for you there, but let me ask you this, because I had this question for you, because I'm assuming you've gone to Stonehenge.
I've been by Stonehenge. I have not actually been on the grounds at the site. I just drove by on the motorway.
Well, I'm going to ask you the question anyway, because when I look at those upright stones in Tiwanako, they look kind of old and weathered compared to the other stones, the smaller stones around them. I mean, have you had a chance to look at those uprights, and do they seem like they have experienced a lot of weathering in relationship to the other stones next to it?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stones that you find at Tiwanako and Puma Punka have the appearance of weathering. Some of them appear to have been uncovered recently and don't have the same kind of weathering. So it's hard to say, because there is work going on there. It's not very active, as Brien said. There doesn't seem to be that much money to invest in archaeological studies, but I know that they were working at Tiwanako, and at Puma Punka you see a mixed bag, where you have some stones that show, they seem to be very old and weathered, and others seem to be relatively just like they were cut yesterday. So it's a mixed bag, and it's a puzzle to me. The function of Puma Punka, though, is more my interest, because what we've seen on the internet, we find a lot of drawings of the blocks of Puma Punka, and they're very unusual blocks, something that has interested both Brien and myself. I mean, we're both fascinated by, exactly what this site was for, and what function the blocks serve. And because of photographs not being sufficient for me, early this year I took some measuring instruments to Bolivia, inside micrometers and verniers, and also indicator gauges to check the flatness of surfaces. And so I was able to take some measurements at Puma Punka and I was really surprised by what I found, because it's not at all like what has been illustrated. And the conclusion I came to was that, I couldn't really support the idea that they were using machines to create these things, particularly the H blocks or the internal cavities on the H blocks. They're different dimensions. They're not parallel surfaces. Some of the blocks are have inside corners that are extremely square, and others are on angles. So it was a huge puzzle.
And see, and that was one of my questions, because you see images of those stones that have like the recessed crosses, and then there's another recess behind that, and they're kind of in a row or, kind of a parallel design on different stones. And I was wondering if you had a chance to measure those elements, and then look at multiple ones to see if you saw the same kind of measurements, one detail to the next.
Well, that's exactly what I did. That was my intention, to see if there was a consistency between one block and the next. And what I found was that, say, if you're looking at the H blocks and you're looking at the recesses, you've got one on the top and one on the bottom. They are actually cut like dovetails. And so on one block, you would have an opening at the front with a dimension of 9.5 inches. The dimension towards the back of the opening is 9.8 inches. So that's on one block. On another block, the opening at the front was 9.7 inches, which is a 200,000 difference. And then on another block, yet again, you have a dimension of 9.4, and then another block is 9.3. But consistently, the dimension at the back of these cavities is always about 300 thousandths bigger than the opening at the front. And so the question is, why? What were they using that for? What was the purpose for it? There's a lot of misunderstanding and speculation that basically is going to be clarified by this data. One of them is the construction method, because there was some theories out there that they were poured in molds.
They do look that way.
They have the appearance of consistency from one block to the other, but it's only when you actually take your measurements that you find out that's just an illusion. It's not. The devil's in the details, as they say, Rita, and and the details tell us that those theories that we dearly love and are not necessarily supported by the evidence. But it's interesting. I mean, a lot of the what you find on the internet are ideas of what these blocks were used for. You see them as architectural elements in a wall, and they look kind of interesting and unique, kind of Frank Lloyd Wright-ish, but there's only 6 of the blocks of these H blocks. And you don't build a complete wall with just 6 blocks. The other speculation was that because they do appear to have the same shapes, that they may be interlocking. But I didn't find any interlocking feature or anything about them that would allow them to interlock because of the varying dimensions. So then the question is, well, what were they for?
That seems to be the big question.
Yeah. And on one, if you look at the inside of the cavities, you'll see that there is another cutout at the bottom of these cavities, and it's like an image that you would find or a feature that you would find in Egypt, and in Egypt they call it the false door. And these look like little cuts that were made at the bottom that had the appearance of a door. You have the transom at the top and the vertical members, and then just a little door shape cut deeper into the rock. What was that for? I mean, generally speaking, when you go to that kind of effort, you have a reason for it. It's either decorative or functional. And I came to the conclusion that it was actually both. I mean, what we have with this block is a combination of symbolic and also functional. And interestingly, I'll just give a plug for the show that Brien was talking about earlier. The Ancient Aliens was interviewing me a couple of weekends ago, and I had actually made a model of one of these blocks with the correct geometries, and also had a little extra showing what they potentially or possibly could have been used for. And what they were used for, in my opinion, was not to build a wall, but to certainly be a part of a doorway, where you had three of these on both sides of an opening, a very large opening, and they were used as hinge blocks. So the dovetails allowed other members to fit in them and be locked into place, but they would have hinges on them that were obviously massive hinges for a gigantic door or a pair of doors that swung out. So it seems that the elements that we find of Puma Punka had both decorative and mechanical purposes. The question is, putting everything together, and the only way you can do that is actually measure it, take the dimensions, and see how things fit together.
The part that I find really interesting about Puma Punka is that stylistically it doesn't fit with any of the other architecture that you find in the region, which I find is an even bigger mystery.
Oh, and I'll just tell you a little story. I was with Dave Childress in 2005, and I've been through Peru, and the only thing that I could really say may have been advanced was the flatness of some of the surfaces. And so when we got to Bolivia, I had a precision square and a precision straight edge, which was sufficient to actually do a spot check of a surface to see how flat it was. But we went to La Paz, and I'd left in my suitcase some other instruments that I had taken along because I hadn't found it necessary to use them in Peru. So I didn't want to carry the weight out to Tiwanako. I was expecting to find more of the same, and then I went to Puma Punka, and my mind was blown away. It's like, oh my God, what have we got here? And it's not just these H blocks that are very interesting, but there's a lot of other artifacts at Puma Punka that show signs of classical signs of machining. But the kind of machining that we're talking about is, when we look at the H blocks, we have very, very sharp internal corners. And the conventional machining that we use it usually involves rotating tools. And these shapes indicate that rotating tools would not achieve the kind of geometries and sharpness that what we see there. So it's almost like, they had some special tools that were used to cut away the stone, leaving very flat surfaces, very, very sharp inside corners. But, the corners on these H blocks are compound angled surfaces that, where you have three surfaces coming together at a point, they're all on different angles. And that kind of geometry requires special tools to accomplish. And even academics accept that Puma Punka, the history books are generally thrown out the window. That the tools to craft those stones are not in the archaeological record. That they had to have had more superior tools when these stones were made.
Well, they just ignore it completely.
And then they don't talk about it. Yeah, they say, "Well, I don't know," and then they don't talk about it. But we do. I mean,
the good people. Brien, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, because you've been very quiet. What do the locals say about it? Because it does, like I was saying earlier, Puma Punka, if it's right next to Tiwanako, they're like worlds apart.
Yeah, well, like I was saying, there are stones very much like what you see at Puma Punka, sort of scattered around Tiwanaku. The interesting thing is that none of the stones seem to be in their original place, as if as if a flood or something moved them, except for some of the massive sandstone blocks, that look like foundation blocks. Some weighing 100 tons. They look like they've sunk a little bit, but it definitely looks like something very catastrophic happened there. The intriguing thing about the actual history is that in the museum, again, they state, the first people came somewhere around, possibly 200 BC or 200 AD and started building this. And they, the drawings they show are literally of native people with ponytails in loincloths with stone hammers, pounding away trying to make this, which is completely ridiculous. But the important thing is that the people who live there now are the Aymara people. And as far as I can tell, they've only been there since about, again, going back to the Inca, since about 900 AD, when they probably kicked the Inca out of the area. So there are no super ancient descendants of super ancient cultures there. It's which, again, is something you find in the area. When people say, that the Nazca built something or whatever, they're not taking into account the waves of civilizations that come and go. So the local people don't really know anything about it, and it's as mysterious to them as it is to everyone else. And just like what you and Chris have said, the academics are just they simply to some extent try not to approach the subject, especially of Puma Punka, because it's just simply odd and completely unique. You don't see anything around the Sacred Valley or Cusco, or in South America, except possibly a few little examples at Ollantaytambo of similar building style. It's as if someone came and built Puma Punka, and that's the only construction that they ever did.
Or it was either way earlier or way older than the other stuff.
Yeah, I think definitely it's the oldest, and that's the funny thing. It's the oldest and the most precise. So it's as though humanity devolved through time, and that's again what Cusco is. The Spanish built beautiful buildings. But they use so much mortar. In some cases, the mortar is an inch thick to fit the blocks together, which was all recycled from Inca buildings. But when it came to places like Sashsayhuaman, because of the size of the stone, they didn't bother touching them because they couldn't deal with cutting stone of that size. So that's the only reason we still have Sashsayhuaman, is because no one's been able to comprehend how they could, move those stones and cut them up.
At this site, how much stone is left? Is there enough for them to try to do some kind of a reconstruction effort, or is it just miscellaneous pieces kind of laying around?
No, that's the absolute best question, because as far as I can tell, at least 90% possibly of Puma Punka is no longer there. It was heavily chopped and smashed up since the time of the Spanish, who arrived in the 16th century, and ever since then, it's been used as a quarry ever since then, including, and it's really disgusting, but they also made the railway bed out of Puma Punka. So in order to prove that theory, I walked along the railroad tracks, and about every 10 feet, I would lean down and pick up, the corner of a so-called diorite block, which obviously came from Puma Punka, and also the little village that's there of Tiwanako. They built their church out of Tiwanako and Puma Punka stone, as well as buildings in La Paz. So, what is left is a very small percentage of what originally would have been there.
It's sounding like this structure might have been pretty massive if they quarried that much material out of it.
It may very well have been, but the fun thing is, because of the gray color of the stone and the precision of it, you can go, for example, to the little church at Tiwanako and just look at the wall, and you can see pieces of Puma Punka, including drill holes and things in them. That's a subject that we haven't brought up, and that's the fact that, because I was a cabinet maker and sculptor, I use drills a lot. So there are a lot of examples of what look to me like high-speed drills of varying sizes. Some are, maybe 1/8 of an inch in diameter, and others are several inches. And they look like core drills have been used to plow into the stone. And there are cases where on a couple of the larger stones where you see hundreds of little drill holes, all the same drill bit being used. And that was not a piece, that was not a piece of obsidian lashed to a wooden twig and then twisted with your hands. This is precision technology at work.
In one image, and I'm just going to say that you put on Facebook, there was an image of a stone that had a round hole, and I'm just going to throw out a number. It might have been 1.5 inches or 2 inches in diameter that looked like it went through a block that might have been 3 or 4 feet long, with some grooves in it. I don't know. I'm just, throwing it out there. But I think you know which picture I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's at the Coricancha, and it's the only one of its. I've scoured the place trying to find more. It's the only one of its kind, and it's it's over 2 feet long. This perfectly, or not, you shouldn't use the word perfect, but this well drilled hole with at least 4 grooves, as if some kind of material was caught in the bit as it was moving through the surface. But that's the front end, and the back end of the block is broken, so we have no idea how long that tube core was.
Well, and the question I have, and either of you can answer this. I don't know if you've seen it, Chris, or maybe just saw the pictures. Is if you're drilling something, and especially if it's really long, then the drill has a tendency to kind of waver, or could have that tendency to waver. Especially if you're just doing it with some little hand drill. How straight was the hole? I mean, 2 feet or 2.5 feet is a long distance to travel without it, giving you some kind of wavering.
Yeah, I mean, I think in stone, if you have a drill bit that is that big a diameter, you generally you should be able to achieve a pretty straight hole. Then other materials, or if you have a smaller drill, the drill might bend and waver off the path. But in stone, if you have a fairly rigid drill, you'll get a straight hole. On that particular hole, it reminds me of the Egyptian holes that you find at Giza, also at Abu Ghraib, Abu Sir, and these holes show they do seem to show the same striations around the circumference of the hole. The only question is, we know that the ancient Egyptians had those were spiral grooves. In other words, the drill was advancing into the material at a fairly rapid rate. But there's been a lot of study done on that. And before that could be concluded, you pretty much have to take an impression of the inside of the hole and then try to determine if those feed lines or the grooves are horizontal or if they're helical. It's an important question to answer because that would give you a better understanding of what the technology is or may have been. Because drilling into that kind of stone in a primitive way, whether it be using a copper and sand, you're not going to have the kind of grooves that you see in Egypt or in these holes at the Coricancha. So that's a part of the investigation and the ongoing investigation into that area. And that's what I'd be interested in. I mean, if we could, when we go in August, if we're able to get an impression of the inside of the hole, and then examine the results, we would know more about the precision of it and the other characteristics of the hole.
Sounds like you're going to be bringing your whole lab down there.
Well, as I have done in the past, I have taken what instruments I can carry, and then part of the study, I'll take some forming wax. In this case, it would be good to have another kind of maybe some dental material, dental wax, to fill the hole and be able to extract it and examine it under the microscope back in the lab. So I won't be taking the lab, but I'll definitely be using it when I get home.
I don't know, any last comments about Tiwanako well, actually, I have one more question about Tiwanako, so I'm going to jump back. Brien, I've heard stories that in Tiwanako that there was actually reconstruction done, and those stone faces that are in the wall were not originally there. Is that true?
As far as I can tell, the real tragedy, and it's in a little e-book I wrote about Tiwanako and Puma Punka, where I have 19th century photographs of it, and it shows what it looked like. And basically at Tiwanako, all there were the standing stones, especially at the Cala Sashsayhuaman, which is the largest of the structures. I think it was in the 1950s that the archaeologists of the time decided to take a lot of the stone that was lying around and fill in between the standing stones, creating walls. And that, again, is where we find a lot of Puma Punka material, because you'll see rough-ish red sandstone blocks, and then once in a while you'll see one of these beautiful gray ones, which is Puma Punka, with the perfect or with the flat surfaces. And so unfortunately, that's also something that most of the guides don't talk about. But the 19th century photographs that I have show that, including the Gate of the Sun, which is the most famous feature there. I have a photograph or two showing that it was half sunken into the ground, and that the break in it, because it's in two pieces, the break was probably the result of some prehistorical event, as in a massive earthquake or flood, or a combination of the two.
When you look, I have one more question about, or maybe not more, just one question. But when I look at it, I keep getting struck by those upright stones, and it just seems to me, why would they carve these upright stones and then not have them be like square or straight? Or some of them look straight, and then other ones look like, they're just kind of these rough-hewn stones. But then because I'm just looking at pictures again. It could be that the stones are just so old that they're weathered into these not square stones anymore.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's definitely what you see the more you look at it, is you see incredibly heavy weathering patterns on them. So what they originally looked like, I don't know, but that's a telltale sign to a novice like me that parts of the construction there are incredibly ancient.
See, and then it just makes me think, well, part of me goes, okay, you look at a site like Stonehenge and you go, why would these people create this massive structure and then just do a kind of crappy job cutting out the rocks, but on the top they have the lintels with the little piece of stone sticking out and the hole that fits perfectly so that they don't fall apart. It's like, it doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Why they would do two different levels of engineering in the same thing, unless they were better, they did look differently and are just so old that they've been weathered down to the shape they are now.
Yeah, well, I've been to Stonehenge a couple of times, and it's very impressive. But in comparison, some of the, I don't want to put a judgment on it, but it's just in comparison, some of the things that we see around Cusco, the Sacred Valley, Tiwanako, and Puma Punka are simply surreal. They're, completely different. They're, everyone scratches their head when they go, even, brilliant engineers like Chris Dunn. It's like, and that's why I keep going back, because it's just, what is this place? Why am I so stupid that I can't figure it out? It's like, well, no one has. But, the great thing is that, Chris, what's wonderful amongst any or other things with this tour is that Chris will be doing actual research, while we're there, which I'm incredibly excited about.
Yeah.
Well,
it's
it's a real mystery, and some of the questions you've asked, Rita, are very pertinent, and certainly the same questions that I've asked. Why do we have seemingly very rough stones that are not regular shaped, and next to them we have this very finely finished, almost perfectly flat stonework? Why? That's the question.
Well, you don't have any novel insights into that.
Well,
that's what you're working on. Okay.
Well, my insight as an engineer is an observer of our modern world and the way we do things. We only craft precision into an object if it's absolutely necessary. And so if you if you want to have a piece that holds up a roof, or it has a function that is doesn't require it to be very precise, then why make it precise? So if you've got a stone that you can rough shape on 4 sides, but it may be a little rough on in parts of it, but it's going to do the job, then you put that into place. And if you've got something that you have you want to use as for a mechanical purpose, like to contain hinges for a door, then you would make it a little more precisely. If you have other features that may be used to channel water, or that may have some other function, then that's why you have such a mixed bag there. You have all kinds of different looking stone, but they could all be within the same structure, but serving a different purpose. It's like a lot of people will look at primitive marks, or marks that could be made without machine work, and say, well, because these exist, then that's how they must have created the other features of a particular block. And there is one block at Puma Punka that shows clearly that it had to have been. It looked like it just came off a milling machine. I mean, the shape of it, the geometry, the precision of it. But also in that same stone, you have a rough-looking hole drilled through the center of it and a groove leading from that hole. And you can't judge the whole culture just by one, that particular feature, the feature of rough, primitive type work. Because even today, what you have is you have standard millwork, or you'll have construction elements that are sent out from a factory to a building site, and the factory work may be tightly controlled and machine made, but when it gets to the building site, then the builders get to work on it, and they customize it to do whatever job they want it to do, which may include cutting it with a torch, or cutting holes in it, changing it in some way to fit it to their purpose. So you do have a mixture of handwork and machine work, even in today's culture.
Well, maybe some of the people making it were just more OC than the other people. I mean, there would be definitely a big difference between you making something and me making something, because, tolerance is not my favorite thing. It's like, well, yeah, there's my big old fat pencil line.
Well, I don't know. You must be very intuitive, or you actually know the division of classes in a manufacturing, Dr. Louise, because
I was a mechanical designer for years. So yes, I do get it.
So you do get it, yes. I mean, you try not to mix precision tool and gauge makers with production machinists, because they are trained to be very careful. They're working with a different level of precision than somebody on the production floor, and so when you are, and so you have a class of people who typically work to within 10,000ths of an inch, and then another class that works within 1,000ths of an inch, and then you get into precision tool and gauge making. You're talking about microns, or 2/10,000ths of an inch, and then but that kind of hierarchy within a manufacturing plant are pretty much transparent. They're not transparent, but they're opaque. People don't know that. They don't see that. And the layperson doesn't understand that because they haven't been a part of it. But
even what you're talking about, with those levels of tolerances, when we talk about building construction today, plus or minus a quarter of an inch isn't all that bad.
Yes, I mean, that's why you wouldn't send a guy like me out to do a job where that kind of tolerance is required, because that would drive me crazy, and it would drive the guy who hired me crazy, because I'd be taking too much time to make it perfect. I mean, that's the way. That's pretty much what's driven into you and ingrained in you when you are going through the different trades of the craft. The craft trades is, the requirements of the job. And my mindset is, if something says 1.0 inches, then it's 1.0 inches. It's not 0.875 or something like that.
I'm like, it's kind of close. Anyway, we're running. I'm great at putting a drawing together, but just don't put me in the shop.
Oh, I was actually
bad, because it's like, it's kind of close. We can put a little putty there and paint over it, and no one will notice.
Well, I was in the shop yesterday, and I was working on another part of my Ancient Alien Appearances, which is coming up the end of February. So And I was turning a shaft. It was actually a copper rod, and the purchasing agent, I wanted 5/16 of an inch, and the purchasing agent got 3/8 of an inch. So I had to turn it down to 5/16. And I was very, very irritated with myself when I found that I was 0.02 under. And then I thought, why are you irritated with yourself? It doesn't really matter. But what it does.
TV. Okay, I want to jump to one last site, which is Nazca, and talk a little bit about the lines. And Brien, I'm just going to say, before we came on the air, you had shared some images of me of places that you were planning on going on the tour, and one of the places was Nazca, and you shared this image of this giant trident. I think most people, when they think of Nazca, they think of the monkey, and they think of the spider, or the runways, or whatever, the straight lines that run all through the desert. But you don't really see this trident-looking thing. What's going on with that?
Well, that's one of the cool things is that I'm in the little town of Paracas, which is about 3 hours from Nazca, and the trident, which is a 600-foot tall geoglyph, is about 5 miles away from me. You can only see it from the ocean. And it's part of the research I'm doing here because Nazca, as well, Nazca is a very complex, much more complex a subject than most people give it credit for. The first people who lived in the Nazca area were the Paracas people, who were the ones I'm studying, and they're they had elongated heads. It's the simple way to put it. They had these huge cone-head-like shaped heads, at least the nobility. And it's believed that they were responsible for making this huge trident as a navigational marker and also making the animal figures at Nazca, the lines being made later.
The lines are later than the animal images? Yeah,
that's the latest thought. Is that the animals were there first, made by the mysterious elongated-skulled Paracas culture, who then became amalgamated into the Nazca people who descended from the highlands of Peru. And then about 1,000 years after that, the Nazca lines were made.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because I saw on... Well, I think it was on Ancient Aliens when they were just first came out, I don't know, somewhere, where Eric von Donigen had talked about where one of the runways were, that they actually had to, cut off the top of the mountain to flatten it out to put it in.
Yeah. The more that I look at the landscape there, the more I'm convinced that actually that's natural weathering. That actually what happened was that these flat mesa-like things, it's almost like in the southwest of the U.S. where you have so much erosion happening over millions of years that you have these natural-ish, flat-top structures. I'm a lot more pragmatic in my approach to Nazca. I don't think aliens were involved with that. Puma Punka, on the other hand,
I took a Incan art anthropology course in college. I have a minor sort of in art history, ancient art, and I was so disappointed when I found out how those glyphs were actually made, and they just kind of scraped away the dirt, and it created these differentiations in color. It wasn't this deep carving into the earth kind of thing.
No, that's true. The thing is that we actually replicated that for Ancient Aliens. The episode that one of the episodes I did that covered Nazca, we went out and I dragged my foot across the ground and created a line, and then the police arrived. But aside from that, and a small bribe later, but yeah, the lines aren't that are not deep. They are straight. The animal figures are far more intriguing because of many different reasons. And the candelabra, which is the trident, it's carved 40 centimeters into incredibly hard sand. So it's a different structure altogether.
Is there any association with that glyph? Any myth tying it to, Inca sea god kind of stories?
Well, that's great. That's a great question because there are tours that are given every day from Paracas here out to see that. And the explanations are, A, that pirates made it in order to have a symbol to hide treasure, which sounds quite stupid. And
they
then the other,
just put a giant X. I mean,
exactly, or a dollar symbol.
Yeah.
But the other explanation is that that the early Paracas people had this cactus cult, because of the hallucinogenic properties of the San Pedro cactus. But I also don't think that's true. The latest theory, which Senior Juan of the museum, the director of the museum here, believes is he believes it's a navigational marker, and it actually is a representation of the Southern Cross in reverse. So he thinks what it is the marker represents home, and that the ancient Paracas people traveled the Pacific, including going to Easter Island, for example, and that marker basically, told them that they and others had reached, returned to the home base area. So I'm studying, wind currents and water currents and all that sort of thing for the next book I'm going to write.
Is there any significance with the Southern Cross,
Yeah.
as a constellation?
Yeah, actually the proportions are almost exactly the same. So if you go, it's basically, if you put the 4 points of the Southern Cross and then, connect them, and then add a few little features, you have the same proportions with this trident feature.
So no sea god myths, huh? Rats.
No, but still, the same idea, a maritime marker. So I'm also going through the oral traditions that I can that speak of the ancient seafaring techniques, what materials they would have used, and partially basing it on Kon-Tiki and all of Thor Heyerdahl's work, because he was to a great extent, I guess you could use the word trashed after he wrote Kon-Tiki, because he became fascinated with Easter Island and the stories that there were red-haired people that lived there. And the funny thing is that's exactly what I'm finding in Paracas. We're finding skulls here that have red hair. And so I'm trying to establish whatever it is that I can about this. Who were these people? Is it possible that there, was genetic input from somewhere else on the planet here, aside from the native South American people who have genetically black hair?
Interesting. Well, I'll be interested to find out how that turns out. Looking at the clock. Chris, any comments about the lines? I mean, obviously, scraping up a bunch of dirt, not a whole lot of high precision, but the size and enormity of them. Any comments about?
Well, I think, I'm actually looking forward to visiting them for the first time in August. The work that really brought them to the public's attention, I think, was Chariots of the Gods by Eric von Daniken, and I was fascinated by their existence, and particularly the narrative that they could not have been made unless you were somewhere above the earth at 10,000 feet or whatever, to be able to visually guide the people who are actually creating them. But then it did seem to be a little magical. And then later on, the opposition came out against the Chariots of the Gods, and the construction of these was minimized. I still think that they are significant. Obviously, they don't have the same kind of importance because it's not what you would consider to be terraforming, like you find in at Ollantaytambo or other places in Peru. But it's a superficial kind of reshaping, so to speak. And I agree with Brien. I don't think we can automatically, when we look at a natural feature, we automatically tend to see if it fits into the whole ancient alien agenda, which is not necessarily my agenda. I prefer to look at the evidence and describe the evidence, maybe present some alternate views, but I don't necessarily land on the alien intervention kind of hypothesis. But as far as the lines are concerned, I think they're a fascinating. I'm looking forward to seeing them. I doubt that that my instruments would actually have any bearing on the discussion, though.
Right. Okay. Just real quick, because we're almost out of time. Brien, you had a new book come out like 2 days ago.
Yeah, it's a book that I co-authored with David Hatcher-Childress. It's about the global phenomenon of the elongated skulls. So it's available through Adventures Unlimited Press, which is also where you can get Chris's books. And it looks at all the cultures in the world who did what's called cranial deformation, which is changing the shape of babies' skulls in order to make them, the best or the simplest description is conehead-like. So that supposedly took place in Egypt, but also amongst the Maya, the Olmec, the island of Malta, in Russia, Iraq, Melanesia, and the majority of the skulls that have been found actually are here in Paracas, Peru, and I'm about 20 feet away from 30 of them.
So will people be able to see those on the tour too?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, and again, where's the tour? How can people get information, or is that available yet?
The tour is August 1st to 10th, with the 4-day extension of Nazca and Paracas after that. If people want to, they can, I'll give my information for it. They can go to my website, www.hiddenincatours.com, and on the front page there's information, beginnings of information about how they can sign up for it.
Cool. And Chris, are you working on any books now? I mean, because, we had you on the last time talking about the lost technologies of ancient Egypt. You got anything in the works?
I even after my first book was published, and it was like 13 years until my second book was published, and so I would say that for that 13 years span, I was working on my second book. So I guess I am. I do feel like I've got a couple more books in me. I've always said though that I'm not in the business of writing books. I like to unless I have something important to say. It's not my intention to just keep on writing books, but I think an update to the Giza power plant is going to be warranted in the future. Maybe, I don't know, 5-10 years down the road. And South America is really piquing my interest now too. And as things are a little difficult in Egypt, I mean, there's still a lot of research in Egypt and in other parts of the world that interest me. But, South America is right next door for me, so it's a natural progression, I think, to start looking at some of those places, and maybe a book about South America eventually. Right now I'm just so busy, I can't even think about starting a book project right now. But we'll see. I'm close to retirement, and hopefully when that day comes, I'll have the time and the energy to do that.
Great. One of the things about South America is it seems like the sites are still accessible to people, and there's not, fences and walls keeping you from going and looking and touching, which is wonderful.
Right.
Well, that's very true, and that, I don't want to tell the public too much, but at Puma Punka, we've had incredible access, just because even the people who run Tiwanako and Puma Punka, they almost disregard Puma Punka. So for us, that's perfect. We can stick squares on the stones and all sorts of things like that. It's great.
Yeah, I spend about 3 or 4 hours just taking measurements of Puma Punka, and the only problem that the guard had was that I'd actually put my coat on one of the blocks and some of my instruments. But other than that, he didn't mind me taking measurements or using my square or straight edge or anything like that. But I found that Puma Punka is really piquing a lot of people's interest. People are fascinated with that place.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's the music.
And for good reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's the music, which means we have to go. So, guys, thank you. Great show. Excellent information. I just so appreciate you coming on and spending the time. And that tour. Oh, my God. All right, I am going to let you go, and I will talk to both of you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome. And next week, we're going to be speaking to Kenneth Dillon about New Orleans voodoo and Jason Gregory about the Way of the Weirdo. And so until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com for more show information and to contact Dr. Rita.